Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on Oracle Database 23C free developer release. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tara Van Cleve and I'm a marketing event manager for the developer initiative here at Oracle. Today we're excited to show you what's new with this release and why it's the perfect database for anyone who wants to build and run data-driven apps. We'll also be recording the session and the link to the recording will be sent to you via email in the next couple of days. If you have any questions during the webinar, we've set up a channel in our developer public Slack called Webinar 23C Developer Release that you can access at the QR code or at bit.ly/odevrel_Slack. Once you're in, you'll land in the general channel, and from there you can search for the webinar channel. We'll also be checking the Zoom chat and Zoom Q&A areas throughout the webinar, and we'll open up for live Q&A after the demo. Today's webcast will be presented by Gerald Wenzel, Senior Director of Product Management. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Gerald.
Thank you very much, Tara. Thank you everybody for joining us to this webcast about Oracle Database 23C. To take a step back, would like to share the vision we have in Oracle Database development. So what we basically put on the wall to make the next version of the Oracle database or the coming versions of the Oracle database look like. And this is to make modern apps and analytics easy to develop and run for all use cases at any scale. So that's our slogan, that's our motto, that's what and any new feature we're building, we have that in the back of our head. Now, how are we accomplishing that? This is by something that we call a converged database model. You may or may not have heard this already before from various people like Andrew Mendelson, Juan Luis, Cloudworld, and so forth. But essentially, the idea here being is that you should not have to use or have to have a separate database for a specific workload or data type that you want to manage. Ideally, you should have one database that allows you to manage many different data types and many different workloads, and hence what you saw exactly in this mission statement to develop and run any app at any scale of any workload. And so we firmly believe that the right approach is to converge these different capabilities and technologies into one database solution. And this is this goes a line in what you see, or to some extent against to what you see in the NoSQL world, right? Where they say if you want to do JSON documents, you have to have a document store. If you want to do graphs, you have a graph store, graph database. If you want to do relational, you have a relational database. There's nothing wrong as such with this approach, other than that it just fragments your data and increases complexity. So if you just want to be able to store JSON documents and relational data, and perhaps even query across the two or span transactions across the two, you can do so with Oracle Database. You can store both natively in the Oracle Database, and you have all these capabilities that the Oracle Database delivers in this one technology. Hence this converged database that brings these technologies together. Now, we also make it easy for you to, or simple to get this converged database platform, the Oracle Database, by either going on the always free autonomous database in our cloud, a simple sign up and a click of a button, and you can have an Oracle database or an autonomous database up and running and ready to go, or on-prem via Oracle Database free, and also in a packaged environment or different runtime environments, if you like, such as container or Docker images or VirtualBox VMs, etc., etc. So depending on the deployment choice, we also try to make it easy. Whichever deployment choice you have, we give you the right bits and pieces to spin up an Oracle database in that deployment environment. Now, the one thing that this webinar is about, and that is new, is Oracle Database free here in the middle. So let me take here just another quick step back to explain what Oracle Database free is and what Oracle Database 23C is before I jump into giving you some actual demos. So you can get Oracle Database 23C today via Oracle Database 23C free developer release, right? You can use this QR code right now, scan it and download the database, or you can just go to oracle.com/23C free and get hold of Oracle Database 23C free developer release. So you may wonder, okay, what is Oracle Database 23c? I mean, obviously, it's the next version of the Oracle database. We all know that 23c is the version number here. But the really important aspect of 23c is that's also the next long-term support release of Oracle Database. So it will be the successor to the current long-term support release 19c and will be supported for several years afterwards. So it's a really, really good time to actually get familiar with the next long-term support release that eventually many of our customers will run their businesses on or will develop new applications on. It comes with over 300 new features. So there's, again, quite a lot of there in 23c. And we specifically targeted this release to accelerate this mission to make it simple to develop and run data-driven apps. So you see this tagline here. We actually, when we had the internal tagline of building this release, we called it App Simple, right? Make it simple to develop apps. And you will see just in 2 slides of what this means out of those over 300 new features. Now, Oracle Database Free is a new offering that we have launched just about a month ago. It's essentially a free Oracle database, hence why we put it in the name Oracle Database Free at your fingertips. So it's for anybody who wants to build and run data-driven apps for free. The important aspect of this is it's on our website under this free use terms and conditions license. You may have seen other technologies already under that license as well. It essentially means it's completely free to use. You can download it straight from the web. You don't need to log into an oracle.com account. You don't need to click through any license agreement or anything like that. You can just get hold of it right away. Now, why did we do this and why did we do Oracle Database 23c free developer release? It is to provide easy early access to the 23c application development features particularly. So as we said, we want to make it easy to build and run any app at any scale, any workload. And we have this tagline App Simple in 23c. So there's a lot of application development features in SQL, PL SQL, around making it easier to build applications in this release. And for the first time ever, we actually said, hey, rather than, waiting until everything's ready, releasing Enterprise Edition to our enterprise customers first, why don't we give developers and DBAs a head start to actually start familiarizing themselves with this new release? And this is exactly what Oracle Database Free developer release is. So you can download this now. It's available in a Docker image. It's available as a VirtualBox OBA file. It's also available as a Linux RPM file. You can download that now and familiarize you with all the application development features and more in that release. Now, I mentioned before, we have the App Simple tagline in this release. And we have over 300 features. And it makes me personally very proud that over 100 of these features are actually in the application development area. So features that help build you applications faster, simpler, easier. And here's just a short list of all the good things that you will find. And I will go into a couple of these with some live demos in just a minute to showcase you what the feature looks like and what the release brings to you. So there's really a lot this time in this release. It's really exciting for developers to build new apps. In particular, there's 6 areas that when we announced Oracle Database 23c at CloudWorld last year, or 6 features or areas, features probably more, that got really, really good reception, and developers couldn't wait to get their hands on it. So first and foremost, the JSON relational duality, where there will be a separate webcast just on that one, so we'll not go into that in too much detail. Also, SQL property graph queries, the SQL PGQ addition to the SQL standard. We have enhanced Kafka APIs, so Oracle Database 23c is Kafka compatible, and also enhanced transactional event queues, formerly known as, or the successor to AQs, formerly known as AQs. So the whole queuing space, a lot has happened as well as declarative data usage and annotations. I will give you a short demo of what that looks like, especially on the domains. JavaScript stored procedure powered by GraalVM, also a short demo on that, and declarative JSON schemas. So with those are kind of the 6 more key features. You will see a lot, but again, coming back to, we have over 100 features in this release of many, many nice things that you will see that will help you to build new applications. We showcased this also to analysts when we released this, and especially Redmonk, the developer analyst firm, but also other analysts like IDC, Gartner, etc. They were all really, really, really positively engaged also to not only what this new functionality looks like, again, JSON relational duality and others, but also here at Redmark specifically called it out. Also what we're doing here, that we're releasing developer or the developer version of the Oracle database free developer release to the developers first, right? Putting them first and foremost so that they can actually get this head start in familiarizing themselves with this new release before the enterprises start upgrading essentially. And this again is something that has never happened in Oracle database development or for Oracle database as such. And hence also why you see here Redmark saying it's a radical departure for Oracle, the fact that we releasing this to the developers first. Now, that's it with slides. I would like to give you a couple of demos now of what it looks like to spin up Oracle Database Free and some of these features, which will take up the rest of this webinar. I did go ahead and record these, so you will see my face here again. I will switch my other camera off just to make sure that, you know, we don't kind of get in a situation where the demo maybe fails or something, and we have to fix that during the webinar. So without further ado, I hand it over to myself, my recorded self, and show you how you can get Oracle Database Free, this case in Docker. Okay, so we're going ahead and starting a new Oracle Database Free container. In my environment, I'm using Podman. Now you can do the same thing with Docker as well. So what we're going to type here is podman run to spin up a new container, set it into the background, give it the name test. I port forward 1521, so that exposes the port 1521 inside the container to my local machine 1521. I define the Oracle password, so that's for syssystem pdb admin, to be let's test one, and then I just say container registry Oracle com database free. Once I hit this, my container is being started, so I already have the image down here, so therefore you don't see any download. If you don't, it will download the image now. Then I hop into the container and check for the logs and see whether the database is ready to run. So podman logs and -f for follow the container test will show me what's going on, and I see here already I have a database ready to use. From here on, just Control-C to get out of it. Let's see whether I can log in. I'm using SQL-CL here, and as we said before, we set the system account password to let's test. So just system, let's test one at localhost and free pdb1. So we forwarded the port to 1521 on my local machine, where we exposed it. That's the default port, so I don't really have to specify it here. So if I hit enter here, I should be able to log in. And here we are. You're up and running with an Oracle Database 23C environment. So you just saw in this recording how quick and easy it is to spin up Oracle Database Free in a Podman or Docker environment via our container image on container registry. So again, you can do this today. You don't see any login requirements here that you had. You didn't see any kind of license acceptance. It's out there in the open. So if you just type in right now, Docker pull or Podman pull container-registry.oracle.com/database/free, it will start the download of that image for you. Likewise, again, if you are like on VirtualBox, we have an OVA file out there, VirtualBox appliance image that you can import and get you up and running in about a couple of minutes time that the import takes. And last but not least, we have this RPM file that you can install natively in Linux if you want to do so. So again, one of the things that we put very close attention on is to make it as easy as possible to get you an Oracle database up and running so that you don't have to spend any time with the installation process, but can spend time building the applications that you want to build or familiarizing you with the features that you have. Now I want to dive into one of the 23C new features. One favorite of mine, because I was quite intimately involved with it, is domains, which allows you to provide usage intents for your data. So again, I will jump into the next recording here and we'll show you what domains are and why they are so powerful. One of the new cool features in Oracle Database 23C are domains, which are lightweight type modifiers. Let me give you an example of how this works. So let me log in into my already existing Oracle Database Free 23C environment running here on my container on my laptop. I already created a user Gerald that we will use for the data model to be created in. So just hop in here, Gerald, password, let's test one, at localhost and free pdb1. Once we are logged in, let's take the example to illustrate what domains are used for shipping addresses. So an address is a well-known construct. It has to have a street name, it has to have a postal or zip code, it has to have a country, and here in the US it has to have also a state. So I'm sticking with the US zip codes here to illustrate this example, which basically means we need a street name, a zip code, and a state name. So that in itself is pretty simple. If we wanted to abstract, for example, just shipping addresses, we could create a new table shipping, have a name for the shipping address. What do we want to use this for? Let's make this 255, should be sufficient for the demo. Then the street name to deliver to. Again, that will be a voucher to 255 for now. A zip code. And we know in the US, a zip code has to be a 5-digit number. So this would be number 5, and then the state, which is usually just a 2-letter abbreviation of the state. So we do a voucher to 2 here. So we created this new table, and now we can store shipping addresses. So well, so good, or so far, so good. We're gonna insert the value for each of these columns. So I don't specify the columns, I hop straight to the values clause. We give this shipping address a name. That would be Gerald's office. That's at 400 Oracle Parkway in 94605, California. We have now the row inserted. Now, one thing that we already spot here is I actually had a deliberate typo. I omitted the 0 in here and just put 9465 in there, but we said it has to be a 5-digit zip code. Well, that's fair enough because we only told the database that we wanted a number that is able to store up to 5 digits. If you wanted to enforce the length, I would have had to also define a check constraint to make sure that the value is always 5 digits or a length of 5. However, I take this example here to illustrate the usefulness of domains. So let's say you have a data model with 20, 50, 200 tables, or perhaps you have a database with 50 different schemas, and each of them has a table with shipping addresses in there. It's like if you want to abstract the zip code information, you would have to go ahead and every time you have the zip code column, ensure that it's a number of 5 and have a check constraint with length of 5 for US zip codes. Well, that's all fair enough, but if you wanted to go ahead and say find later on all the columns that are identified as zip codes, you already struggle a little bit with that. You kind of have to either ensure you have good naming conventions and call the column name appropriately, such as zip here, for example, or use something like column comments or annotations, also all well and good. However, you would still have to retype the check constraint all the time. Like whenever you want to write this, whenever you want to store a zip code, you'd have to write another check constraint of length 5. Wouldn't it be really nice if you could encapsulate that domain knowledge of a zip code being numeric up to 5 digits, but has to be 5 digits in a reusable object? And that's exactly where domains come in. So here's how this would work. Let me roll back this row because that was invalid. And I want to make sure to show you later on how the domain applies on top of that. So with 23C, you have this new database object called a domain. So you can say create domain and give it a name. In this case, I want a zip code, right? And then you tell the database what data type this should be. Well, we knew already before this has to be a number and has to be able to store 5 digits. But also we specify this check constraint. Now again, I could have done both of this on the table, but I want this reusable object that I can later on use in many tables. So I go ahead and say we have here a constraint valid zip, and that's a check constraint where we check the length of zip code. So this is essentially the domain name that we're using here. The value that this domain will be inspecting is of 5, no less, no more. So we create this, now we have this domain. So now we can go ahead and associate that zip column that we had up here with that domain, and hence I'll roll back because it will now not succeed because we would have invalid data in there. So now that the table is empty, I can go ahead and say alter table shipping, modify the zip column to be associated with domain zip code. There we go. Our data is now altered. So if I were to go ahead now and insert the same information again in my table, I actually now have this check constraint firing. And what you will see is that the error tells you the check constraint is firing due to the domain constraint valid zip that we specified here of the domain Gerald zip code. So Gerald in both cases here is of course the username that we connected to the schema that we're using here, right? So you see, okay, we have this zip code domain and we have this constraint valid zip that is firing here and hence preventing us from storing this information. Now, of course, we can just go ahead and correct this typo and say this was 605, it was always meant to be like that, and our row is inserted. Everything's fine. Now let's say that your application evolves and you also want to store billing addresses, but for whatever reason, you want to make sure that the shipping addresses and billing addresses are stored in separate tables along with the corresponding information, such as for shipping address, the name we already had before, and for the billing address, the credit card number. So we go ahead and create a new table, billing, and we store the credit card number in here. This must be a number of 16 digits. That itself would also be a good example of a domain, by the way, credit card information. And here again, we have the street name, that is voucher 255, and the zip code information. And here's the beauty of domains. Rather than me typing this over again, I can now just use the domain if I wanted to, either as I said before, where I mark the column zip with domain zip code, so if this new keyword domain and then the domain name, or actually for simplicity, I can literally just use the domain instead of the data type. So I can literally just say here zip code, and that domain stands in instead of the data type. The data type information will be, just like above, derived from the domain. Now, the only difference why I did this here with domain zip code is because we already had the column defined with the data type. So we just associated the column with the or the already existing column with the domain. While here we have a brand new column because it's a brand new table. So we just derive all the information from the domain right away. I could here type number 5 and then domain zip code, but ideally I don't want to have to worry about the data type information either. The domain takes care of all of that. And then last but not least, we have this state, which will be a voucher 2 again of 2. There we go. Now we have this billing table created that uses this zip code information. So one of the nice things about domains is it encapsulates the usage intent, if you like, or what the actual information that you want to store in an object that is discoverable. Not only does it enforce, as we have seen before, constraints, data type information or data type definition, and a couple of other attributes, but really it allows us to tell the database that this column here is not just a number 5, but it's something that we call zip code. And zip code may not make any sense to the database, or it doesn't make any sense to the database. It's just an identifier, just a name, but it makes very well sense to us humans. And of course, also applications can derive information from that. So what do I mean by that? Well, remember I had said before, what if you have an existing data model and you want to know how many zip codes you store in how many columns across how many tables? Let's say you expand your business to other countries, let's say Austria, for example, where you only use 4-digit zip codes. Well, in the pre-domain era, you would have to have, as said before, really good naming conventions or use column comments. In 23C, of course, you could also define annotations to find these columns back and now go back and essentially change these check constraints to allow for 4 or 5 digits, potentially depending also on the country code. With domains, however, you can just look up, okay, which columns are associated with the domain, and you have the answer. So there's a couple of new data dictionary views that you can use to interrogate the database, what domains you have, where they're specified, what check constraints and other properties they have. So one is user domains, gives you all the domains for your given user. So you can go ahead and say select name and the columns from user domains. And you will see we have one domain here called zip code with one column. So cols is short for column, which alludes to an interesting other feature that we have as part of domain, which is called multi-column domains. So for example, like the address actually will be a concept, as we've said before, of street name, zip code, and state. So you could actually go ahead and define a domain on top of these 3 columns in itself to ensure that this is a valid address. But for simplicity, let's just stick with the zip codes right now. So we have here the zip code with this 1 column, of course. So far, so good. Now, more interesting is perhaps when we look into what other information we have in these views. So for example, you have user domain cols, another view that gives you more information about the column. So you could say select domain name and the column name and the data type of the column from user domain, domain cols. And again, you know, we see basically we have a domain zip code and the same column name, because that's what we use in a single column domain. The domain name equals column name, and the data type is number. But more interesting, let's go back to this other scenario. Well, which table is actually using this domain? Right, that would be interesting. Well, you already may be familiar with user tab cols, which is the view that gives you information about table columns. Well, that has been extended to also now include domain information. So you can now go ahead and say select table name, column name from user tab cols. So we're looking for all our tables in the user Gerald, where domain name equals zip code. And here we go. You will actually see, oh, you have 2 tables in your schema, because you queried user. You could do all or DBA tab calls here, of course, as well, to go across schemas, or CDB to go across PDBs. But in this case, we see that our schema Gerald actually has 2 tables, billing and shipping, where there's a column each assigned or marked with the domain, associated with the domain zip code. And that is really, really important insight to, or can be really important insight to your application or to your users, right? Because again, it's like you could have many, many, many columns that are of type number 5, or, you know, just type number, and you didn't even specify the precision. But you really don't have any knowledge about whether that's a zip code, is it, you know, some quantity, is it a credit card number, is it weight, it could be anything, right? But these domain constructs, or these domain types, allow you to abstract this in reusable database objects. So not only to make sure that you always apply the same enforcing constraints or the same data type information on top of that, so that you can never have like a data type mismatch, or, you know, somebody actually type length of the zip code 6 because of a typo or because of some other country using 6 digits, but making sure that this is always cohesive across your data model, therefore enhancing your data quality. And of course also, as said before, to help you identify the usage of that data type or of the column. Now here's a really interesting and important aspect. We said before, these are lightweight type modifiers. So domains do not change the underlying data type of your table, right? So if we just do a describe here on shipping, we see that the zip column here is still a number 5. And therefore you can do anything as what you could do with a number data type, which means like any other column that you have in a database. And this is really, really important, because you could, of course, introduce a user-defined type for zip code information as well, and there may be nothing wrong with that. But with user-defined types, applications have to be aware of these types, and if they are not, then that could lead to access issues. Basically, the application not knowing what it deals with, maybe refusing to read that information or to write to the database with that information. While for domains, the underlying transport mechanism or the underlying transport data type remains a number 5. And therefore, for the application, this is just a number 5, like it was before, like as if you would have to specify 50 different zip code columns with 50 different check constraints. But we allow you here to mark these columns and to encapsulate the common attributes of this zip code construct in the database and tell the database to enforce it across your tables or schemas. All right, so we've just seen how powerful domains can be, hence also one of these marquee features in Oracle Database 23c. Now, there's a lot more to them. I didn't cover flex domains, and I just barely mentioned or briefly mentioned the multi-column domains. So definitely check out that feature and think how you can enhance your data model and data quality by using them. Switching gears slightly, I would like to talk about JavaScript stored procedures. In Oracle Database 21c, the previous version before 23c, we already introduced GraalVM as part of the Oracle database, or embedded GraalVM as part of the database to allow the execution of JavaScript code snippets. We only exposed this via Apex so that Apex developers could actually paste snippets of JavaScript code into the database or into the Apex application, and they have the database executed. Starting with 23c, you can have full-on JavaScript stored procedure support, so the capability of writing JavaScript functions and procedures and even importing libraries. Let's take a look what that looks like. With Oracle Database 23c also comes the capability of executing JavaScript code inside your Oracle database, not only allowing you to create JavaScript stored procedures or functions, but also loading JavaScript libraries into the Oracle database and calling them via SQL or PL/SQL like it were any other PL/SQL function. A real nice thing of that is that you can now either re-leverage existing business logic written in JavaScript and execute it closer in database than ever before. For example, some things like credit card validation, email validation, etc. You already execute this on the front end. Wouldn't it be nice if you can have the exact same check also happening on the back end where your data is? But you also get the nice benefits of Oracle database and all its security assurances with it, meaning you have privileges that specify whether you can execute JavaScript code or not. And of course, privileges to even be able to create these JavaScript stored procedures or modules, as we will call these libraries, loaded into the Oracle database. Now, let me give you a very quick example of what this looks like. I will use my Gerald schema user here again to define a JavaScript stored procedure and then execute it. First and foremost, for Gerald to be able to execute JavaScript, I've already given it the DB developer role, so therefore it can already create procedures and functions. But for it to be able to execute JavaScript, I need to grant it the right privilege. So I do so by connecting with a system user here on my local environment. And then specify the grant, which is grant execute on JavaScript code to Gerald. Now, once I've done that, I can connect over with Gerald and now give you a quick demo. So what I will demonstrate to you here is just a very, very simple JavaScript stored procedure that essentially takes a value passed on and inserts a record into a table. So it's something that, if you're familiar with PL/SQL, is just a very short procedure, just illustrating the point of how to create the procedure, pass on a parameter, and executing SQL inside it. I'll give you the same thing here in JavaScript so that you can follow along with something that will probably be a very common task for you to receive information via parameters and then either store them in the database or modify them further. To demonstrate that, first let me create this table that will hold the values that we want to insert via the procedure. In this case, we just go with, let's say, a greetings table. We want to store greetings in that table. So I go ahead and create table greetings, and it's very simple. We just have here what the greeting is, and it's a voucher to, let's say, 25 or 250. That's how you get 255 characters. So I created the table. Now I go ahead and create this JavaScript stored procedure. So for the beginning, this is very similar like you will have in PL/SQL. So you have create or replace procedure. Then you give it a name. In this case, I call it insert greetings. Or let's just call it insert greeting because we only insert one. and then we pass on a parameter. Now in this case, I call this parameter, and this is an interesting one, I call it p_name. However, I put it in double quotes because PL/SQL, an Oracle database, is case insensitive with identifier names. So p_name just spelled without double quotes would be all uppercase. But I want to be able to use it in lowercase in my JavaScript code, as JavaScript is case sensitive. So double quotes will persist or ensure the case that I've provided here, which means all lowercase. So say here p_name in double quotes, and then this is again a varchar2 that we pass on. Now here comes the interesting part. Here's where I say, this is not PL/SQL, but this is JavaScript. And so this is basically as the multilingual engine language JavaScript, which tells the database that what's coming next is JavaScript code to be interpreted and not any other code or syntax to be interpreted. And then what I do here, because I'm in a command line, I qualify this quoted string of JavaScript, which is with these markers, this Q and quote, which is like a multi-line string, and then the tilde sign here that allows you or that tells the database that what's next is JavaScript to come in that string. First, I'm gonna specify just a variable. So we are now in JavaScript land, and I call this variable statement, which will be my insert into statement. And this will be very simple. This will be insert into greetings, the table that we defined before, and we only have one column. So I'll just do here values. And here I pass on the string hello space and then concatenate it with my bind variable that I want to use. So what you see here is you got here a string that will be passed on. This is like as if you were outside in JavaScript. You construct your insert into statement, and then an insert into statement, that string in there has an actual string value of hello concatenated with this bind variable that we will be using. So we define this, and then I go ahead and use my session context to execute the statement. So this is a predefined object or a structure, if you like, in JavaScript. So I can just say session and then dot execute, which will execute the statement. So I pass on that statement, and I need to pass on a value for my bind variable here, of course. Now in JavaScript, we have essentially an array here that we pass on, but an array of just one value, and this would be p_name. So you see here, I use lowercase p_name, and hence why I also wanted lowercase up there. If I were to omit the double quotes, this would have to be uppercase, because that's what will be passed on to JavaScript. Now, once I have done that, I just close off this function call, and you know what, let's use a semicolon here, because JavaScript doesn't care whether there is a semicolon or not. So we see here, we have a semicolon here, not. It will be interpreted anyway. And then let's close off this snippet here that we have by closing this string and a semicolon now being back in PL/SQL land, or in the function wrapper land. Really, there's really no PL/SQL here, but the procedure definition part of the Oracle syntax parser. And we close this off with a semicolon, because the Oracle syntax parser will expect the semicolon just like every other SQL statement behind it here in this function wrapper or procedure wrapper as well. And then we terminate this statement with the commonly known slash. So now this has created this new procedure, insert greetings. Here again, you can see that although I specified this in lowercase, it's all here in uppercase that's being stored. So again, just if you were wondering what those quotes are for, this is to preserve the lowercase p_name. You will also note I didn't put a commit in there, so that assures me the control of the transaction within my context of my session. So basically, when I execute this procedure, I do not roll back or commit in there. I leave that up to the session outside to decide, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. You call a bunch of code, you modify, manipulate data. There could be something in a transaction that goes wrong later on. And therefore, you really, really don't want to commit in the procedure, kind of finishing your transaction halfway through. So anyway, now that we have that, let's call this procedure and see what happens. So you can either use begin and end here and go into PL/SQL, or exec. Let me do this begin and to show you how this is executed essentially by an anonymous PL/SQL block now. So now it would be in PL/SQL, and here just call insert greeting, and I pass on the value Gerald. So this is all PL/SQL land, and again we have end this block with a semicolon and then the slash. And we will see that this procedure has been successfully executed. So now let's see what happened. Did we actually get a value in my table? And indeed, we did get this hello Gerald, which we will see again. This is this concatenation of the hard-coded hello space and this bind variable, and we have passed on here's value. It also very, very nicely illustrates how code can be intermixed and exchanged or called from each other. So we basically called SQL from JavaScript here, that is called from PL/SQL, just like as you would expect, right? Because you really don't want to know what language the procedure function is written in. You just want to run it and execute it, right? You shouldn't have to know if you execute a function. The function may have been written by somebody else. And, you know, likewise here, as said, you have full transactional control still over it. So if we roll this back and select here again, we'll see that no rows have been found. So it's a really cool functionality that we've put into the Oracle database to essentially allow you to mix JavaScript code with your existing PL/SQL and SQL code, helping JavaScript developers to put business logic written in JavaScript closer to the Oracle database with the very same assurances and benefits that millions of developers already get from writing PL/SQL inside the Oracle database. All right, so we've seen now how we can use JavaScript in the Oracle database. The one part that we didn't show is how we can import packages, JavaScript libraries essentially, into the database as well and be able to call that. In the last demo here, I want to switch gears a little bit. I showed you 2 of the marquee features that are in 23C out of the 6 that I've put on the slide before. There's actually also a lot of nice smaller enhancements that gotten into 23C, something that I will call productivity boosters and time savers, maybe also some of those things where you have always wondered, why can Oracle not just do that? It would be so much easier or nicer if I had this capability. So without further ado, I'll show you some of the perhaps smaller, but definitely also worthwhile to mention gems that are coming in Oracle Database or have come in Oracle Database 23C as well. Oracle Database 23C also has a lot of smaller enhancements and new features you definitely don't want to miss out on. Certainly check out the new features guide in the documentation and see all the amazing functionality we have put in this release. I'll give you a quick walkthrough for some of those that I personally like a lot, and hopefully you will too. Starting with Oracle Database 23C, we have introduced schema level privileges, which allows you to grant privileges on schema level. Before that, you could only do this on either object level or database level. So what does this mean? Well, let me jump into my local database. I actually have here a new schema called HR for Human Resources that has a bunch of tables inside of it. So if we just do select table name from user tables, you will see that there's a total of 7 tables in this schema. Now, if I wanted to grant select access to this table to another user in the database, prior to 23C, I either would have to do a grant select on table or a grant select any table to that user. Now, both of these have certain downsides. On the first one, if you grant every individual table by saying, grant select on countries to, let's say, user Gerald here, or grant select on locations to Gerald, you would have to, every time the schema introduces a new table, you would have to go back in and grant the privilege again. Now, you could pack this up in a role, of course, already, and maybe that's the right way for you to do so. But then every time a schema introduces a new table, you would have to maintain that role. Likewise, every time the schema removes a table, you would have to maintain the role. Sometimes it's really nice to say, look, this user is allowed to access any table in this schema. I don't care which table it is. This user needs access to that schema. It may be, the HR department user that needs to access data about the HR department. Now, prior to 23C, as said, you either could do it this way or you could do the grant select any table to that user. However, that's database-wide, which means that a user can now select any table in the entire database, which we certainly don't want if we have other schemas in there, such as payroll or engineering, etc. It's like the user should really be able to access this one schema. Starting with 23C, you can say the following. You can go ahead and say grant select any table on schema HR to Gerald. And that essentially tells the database that Gerald, user Gerald, has the privilege to select any table on schema HR. So only select any table that is in schema HR. Likewise, you can say grant insert any table on schema HR to Gerald. And of course, you can combine the two by saying grant select any table, comma, insert any table on schema HR to Gerald. In all of these cases, the database will interpret the on schema HR and only giving you this privilege for the schema HR. Now, once you have that, or once I've done this, which I just did, I can connect over as Gerald and select from any of those 7 tables. So select star from. Now still need a schema qualifier, of course. The table is in the HR schema, not in my own schema. So hr.countries. And here we have the list of all countries, or select star from hr.locations, I believe was another one. And here we have the list of all the locations. So that's really, really nice. So let me clear my screen here just for the next demo. Another really nice feature that came into 23C is that the concat function, the function used to concatenate a couple of strings together, now supports variable arguments or var args, which means you can pass on too many arguments to concatenate the whole string together. So here we are connected with the user Gerald again, and I have, for example, access on the HR schema. And what I would go ahead here is if I wanted to say, write a report where I get the first name with a space of the last name and the department in parentheses. I can go ahead now and say select concat, and then I will do like employee's first name, comma, space, comma, and then employee last name, comma, space, open parentheses for the department, quote, comma, then department name, and close parentheses, and finish this function off. So what you see here is like you have one function concat that concatenates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parameters together. And then we will just finish this up and say from HR employees, we call this E, and HR department D, and then a join between E dot department ID to D dot department ID. And here we go. So that's really, really nice. Prior to that, you would have had to go ahead and have essentially 5 concat functions that are nested with each other to support this mechanism. Another cool feature that came in Oracle Database 23C is the capability to group by column alias and not having to repeat the entire expression in the select clause. So what does that mean? Well, let's assume we want to write a report on the HR schema that I've already installed in this database, where we want to have the sum of the salary of each department. But in this case, we want the report to not only list the department name, but also the department ID in parentheses. So the select would look something like this, select, and then we would have a concat, d.department name, and then we would have parentheses, then d.department ID, and we close these parentheses. And then we would say, you know, as we want this to be called department, and then we do a sum of the e.salary from the employees. And then we will go ahead and say from, well, hr.departments D and hr.employees E, and then a join condition, of course, where e.department ID equals d.department ID. And last but not least, we would now have this group by expression so that we get this aggregation of the salary. So prior to 23C, we would have to go ahead and say group by, and then this a whole long list. Department wasn't valid because, strictly speaking, in SQL itself, or SQL itself will start the processing from the from clause, then the where clause, then creates the grouping set, and then the projection on top. So strictly speaking, the group by phase doesn't know yet what's going on the select phase, if that makes sense. But don't worry about that. Point is, prior to 23C, you had to repeat this whole expression, which can be quite a mouthful, especially when you have longer ones. Now in 23C, you can just say group by department. And here we go. Super nice little time saver. Just make sure that you use this as and then the department or the column alias that you want to use. And then you can use this part of it. Okay, let me clean my screen or clear my screen again and then show you my last example here. Another cool feature that came in Oracle Database 23C is the table value constructor, which essentially allows the values clause to produce multiple rows in one invocation, hence having multiple table values. Let me show you how that feature works real quick. So in my database here, I already have the HR schema installed. And if we connect over with my privileged user, we can see that if I do describe on HR departments, we have this table here that has like 4 columns, right? It's in the HR schema. And we want to be able to insert multiple rows into that table in one go. Now I'm a good citizen, so I never really do any operations with the system account here. So what I will go ahead is to grant insert any table on schema HR to Gerald, this user that we have used already before, and connect back over to this user. And now the nice thing what we can do is I can go ahead and say insert into HR departments, and we only have 2 not null columns, so we quickly use these 2 columns to demonstrate this, so department ID and department name. And now we say values, and usually in the good old days we would have specified the value of the row, meaning these 2 values that we had, and then write another insert into statement for the next row to insert. Now we don't have to do this anymore. Now we can just go ahead and say parentheses as we did before, and let's say we have department ID 1000 and department name is engineering, and we close this row and add a comma and define another row or another value for the table clause, right? So we have 1001 and we call this research, and we add another row 1002, we call this QA, and we add another row 1003 and we call this release management. Now, the nice thing here is you see we have like one values clause with one insert into statement on top of it, but we are specifying 4 different rows in essentially 4 different sets of these parentheses that match the column clause up here. So if we hit enter here, we see that we have inserted 4 rows in one go, which is really, really neat because that means that we didn't have to execute 4 insert into statements and type all of this part here again, especially if you have tables with a lot of columns. That can just be a lot of typing that you have to do. And just to round this off, if we select from this HR departments where department ID greater equal 1000, we will see indeed that all these 4 rows are in there. All right, I hope you enjoyed the demos. It showcased some of the new capabilities of Oracle Database 23C free, but again, there's like over 100 new application development features in there. So how can you get Oracle Database free? Well, as said, you can head over to oracle.com/database/free or oracle.com/23C free, etc. You will get a QR code on just the next slide once again as well. Or you can also pull the Docker images from the container-registry.oracle.com. Where can you get help and ask questions? We do have a forum for Oracle Database free developer release. So if you head over to forums.oracle.com, then click on Dev Community, you will find the entry Oracle Database free. So feel free to join the community, ask your questions, or help your fellow community members answering questions. And will Oracle Database 23C be the next long-term support release? Once again, that's a yes. So that's why this is very, very exciting. This will be the successor to 19C in terms of support timeframe. And where can you find the documentation? If you head over to docs.oracle.com and then either click on Oracle Database there, or you go docs.oracle.com/en/database or /Oracle, you will find the documentation set for Oracle Database 23C free developer release. You will also see a banner on the top telling you that this is for the developer release, so that you know that you are on this new developer release and not on 19C or 21C. With that, thank you very much for your attention in this webcast. So once again, you can and should download Oracle Database 23C now. With that, I believe we are right on top of the hour. So thank you very much for being with us here in this webcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and hand it over to you again, Tara.
Thank you again so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.